In the North Atlantic Dragon Palace, 60 elite soldiers were guarding the main gate with weapons. 5 meters from the gate stood a respectful man in his 60s. He was wearing a bright red robe with a belt and a pair of black boots. Behind him was a luxurious carriage full of treasures. With his back hunched, General Arthur strolled from the gate in the company of a young chief of the soldiers. "General Arthur, how are you doing?" The man in the bright red robe immediately stepped up to greet him. General Arthur looked at this man and said, "General Matthew, the Dragon King is not in the palace. Your unexpected visit to our North Atlantic Dragon Palace with treasures has put me in a difficult position." General Matthew's fawning smile turned to bitterness. "It has been 3 days, and you still can't find the Dragon King?" "The Dragon King is very busy. Could you wait a few more days? I can't let you in without the Dragon King's permission." General Arthur seemed to be in a dilemma. General Matthew, who had traveled from the distant South Atlantic Dragon Palace, felt like crying at this answer. At Grandmaster Hank's order, he came to North Atlantic with precious gifts as the extension of an olive branch. However, North Atlantic only sent out General Arthur to deal with him. He received cold treatment and wasn't allowed into the palace. He waited for 3 days outside the gate of the palace, eating and sleeping in the open. However, it was what the South Atlantic deserved. Since Grandmaster Hank had rudely broken into North Atlantic by force, they were just returning the favor. With their crown prince still imprisoned in the North Atlantic Dragon Palace, they had to keep their heads low, despite North Atlantic's cold attitude. "Sorry, but I have business to tend to. General Matthew, I'm afraid that you will have to wait here a little longer." General Arthur slightly bowed at General Matthew before turning around and walking toward the palace. General Matthew gritted his teeth. Giving up his dignity, he hurried over and stopped General Arthur with a hand on his arm. "General Arthur, we'll offer 5 more pieces of South Atlantic Mystic Ice. How about that?" He begged with a bitter expression on his face. General Arthur shook his head and lightly removed General Matthew's hand from his arm. "I'll report it to the Dragon King." General Matthew gritted his teeth. 8 pieces. They were offering 20 pieces of South Atlantic Mystic Ice. When General Arthur's expression softened at this offer, General Matthew immediately said, "We are offering these treasures as a thank you for the excellent care the North Atlantic has given to our Crown Prince. However, we are afraid that we have troubled you guys for too long and hoped that he would return to his palace to recover from his injuries." He skipped the part about Grandmaster Hank's intrusion into the North Atlantic Dragon Palace as if these unpleasantries had never happened. 20 pieces of South Atlantic Mystic Ice were the bottom line that old man had authorized to him in this negotiation. Including many other treasures, South Atlantic was indeed offering a fortune to get Henry back. "General Matthew, please wait here while I talk about it with the other elders. If they are just thank you gifts, I think we might be able to accept them." General Arthur relented. Dracon had ordered him to make South Atlantic's envoy wait for 3 days before seeing them. If South Atlantic got more anxious and offered more gifts, it would mean that this whole thing isn't a trap. When South Atlantic offered 20 pieces of Mystic Ice, which were important strategic resources, it showed they were at their limits. General Arthur returned to the palace and reported South Atlantic's offer to Dracon. He finally nodded. "Release him." "Yes, Your Majesty." General Arthur immediately walked out with Dracon's order and went to the rear of the palace. Since South Atlantic and North Atlantic were not officially at war, it was troublesome for them to keep the Crown Prince of South Atlantic captive. It was a good deal for them to trade off the burden for many treasures, including 20 pieces of South Atlantic Mystic Ice. The only thing that General Arthur didn't understand was why Grandmaster Hank suddenly submitted to them. Just a few days ago, he had broken into the North Atlantic Dragon Palace and taken away 16 elders by force. He mulled it over and couldn't think of anyone who could have changed the situation. In the entire North Atlantic Dragon clan, there was only one person he was not certain about, and that person was Jacob, the prince. Because Henry had been cussing Jacob all day long since he was imprisoned in the palace, General Arthur knew that it was Jacob who had beat Henry and thrown him into the sea. Obviously, the 16 elders who fell into the sea with Henry were also the victims of Jacob. Besides, Jacob had defeated Inspector Tom back at Sophie's birthday party, got the trust of Inspector Susan, and even absorbed the last lightning power in Kenneth's heavenly tribulation. In General Arthur's eyes, the prince had given them lots of surprises. Even Kenneth had told him this before leaving the Dragon Palace. "Keep an eye on Jacob. I'll count on him when I charge at the Heavenly Dragon Realm the next time." "Indeed, the Dragon King has sharp eyes." General Arthur smiled while he walked to the back of the palace. Henry had been fed simple meals each day in the North Atlantic Dragon Palace, and he was grumpy when he was released from the palace. He shouted immediately when he walked out. "North Atlantic, you dared to imprison me? One day I'll dismantle this whole place. My grandpa will come back with troops and trample you. Yuck! What garbage did you feed me each day?" While he walked out, he cussed with the hatred that had been accumulating in his mind over the past few days. The guards of the Dragon Palace were angry at his arrogance. However, they had to keep their anger in check since General Arthur was with him. "Who's making such noises?" The little master, Noah, who had been collecting herbs in the nearby 100-flower palace, couldn't bear the noises and jumped out. He had been slapped in the face by Grandmaster Hank a few days ago, and the handprint on his cheek had finally receded a bit. Today, he went to the 100-flower palace, getting some herbs to heal the swelling. After that, he was planning to go to the South Atlantic Dragon Palace and make trouble for that oldie. Now, he ran into the Crown Prince of the South Atlantic Dragon Palace, who was just released. "Where did you come from, you dirty urchin? How dare you block my way?" Henry was burning with rage. Since he couldn't defeat General Arthur, he decided to vent his anger on the little boy in front of him. He immediately kicked the boy. Unprepared, the little master was kicked hard on the chest. He fell back and slid half a meter on the stone path. The herbs in his hands flew into the air. Not expecting such viciousness from Henry, General Arthur wasn't quick enough to block for the little master. He gasped at the sight. In the past 100 years, the little master had been making fires for Thomas, but his status as Thomas's only disciple was extraordinary. He was a demon beast who had transformed into the human form 100 years ago. He restarted the cultivation then, and he was now only at the 2nd level, despite his arrogant attitude. Thomas had not taught him any cultivation techniques, ordering him to focus on the fields of making elixirs and treasures, since this ancestor of the dragon tribe didn't think that anyone would dare to mess with his disciple. When the little master tried to get up, Henry walked over and gave him 2 more kicks. "These are what you get for your big mouth." Instantly, the robe that Noah was wearing was covered with footprints. The guards rushed over to stop Henry, while General Arthur pulled him back to prevent him from hitting the little master anymore. Bruised all over, the little boy struggled and finally got up from the ground. Henry snorted and said, "That's what you get for messing with me." In his mind, his grandpa must have come with troops, and the North Atlantic was forced to release him due to the pressure. When the guards kept Henry in control, General Arthur hurried and helped Noah, who was still dizzy. "Little master." He reached out, but the boy slapped away his hand angrily. General Arthur was anxious. After all, it wouldn't reflect well on North Atlantic when Ancestor Thomas's disciple got hit in the palace, twice now. Now, he only hoped that Noah would turn all his anger on the South Atlantic Dragon Palace instead of them. "You'll get 100 times what you did to me today." Glancing at the trampled herbs on the ground, he limped to the southeast corner of the palace. Although his cultivation strength was weak, he had lots of ways to retaliate against the South Atlantic Dragon Palace. He would make them cry. "Come at me!" Furious, Henry provoked even more. General Arthur looked at Henry with pity in his eyes and thought, "This kid is asking for death. The treasures in the little master's room are more than enough to kill him."